Trump's tweets have exposed his true Islamophobia. A travel ban is a travel ban, he now says. But guess what? Asian Americans have a little Islamophobic issue of their own. That's next on Emil Amok's Takeout. Hi, everyone, and welcome to what I call Emil Amok's Takeout. We serve it, you take it out. It forms the acronym EAT, EAT, and it is time to eat. My takes on all things about race, society, politics, and diversity, and everything those things touch in our culture and society with respect to Asian Americans. And of course, you don't have to be Asian American to lend us your ears. It's your minds we want. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host, and you might say, Emil, why Amok? Well, the short story is this. For nearly 15 years, my Emil Amok column was a staple of Asian Week, what was once the leading Asian American weekly in English in America. Amok was also the name of my compilation of essays from the aforementioned, and Amok, it's on my driver's license. It's my middle name. Not indicative of my mental state. And it's also the name of my solo show. It's a premiere at the San Diego International Fringe Festival, June 23rd through 28th. Hey, and we're doing a little teaser at the Marsh in San Francisco on Valencia on June 12th. So if you're free, come on by. I kind of describe my solo show as Spalding Gray meets Ferdinand Marcos. I mean, I'm inspired by Spalding Gray. Not so much inspired by Marcos, except I do have some Ilocano blood in me. It was Gray's birthday on June 5th, incidentally, and so, God, the late Spalding Gray, he would have been 76 years old. And so I salute him. He remains an inspiration. You can watch his stuff on YouTube. I watch his interviews. I watch his monologues, and like I said, June 23rd through 28th at the San Diego International Fringe Festival, I do my Amok monologues, and we're doing a little teaser at the Marsh in San Francisco on June 12th. So come on by. Of course, the Amok column is now home based on the website of the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund blog. That's at AALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. Check it out. And if you like what you see and hear, ALDEF is a legitimate 501c3. Go to the donate button there. All your help is tax deductible. Really? And now, isn't that a good way to get a tax cut? Not like this draconian Trump way, but there it is, the tax deductible donation right there at the ALDEF blog, and we really appreciate it. Now, on this episode, we're dropping this a bit later because there's so much news happening. Today, we're talking to Jennifer Lee, professor at Columbia. Oh, that's worth a shriek from David Dow. She's now a professor returning to her alma mater at Columbia. She was at UC-Irvine, and together with Karthick Ramakrishnan of UC-Riverside, public policy professor there, they did some interesting research for the National Asian American Survey last year, and it kind of proves what some people have, some people are shrieking about how some Asians perceive other Asian. And guess what? There's an East Asian, South Asian divide in America, and it may even suggest a real Islamophobia problem that we have. And that's coming up. But first, if you read the blog at aldef.org/blog, I'm concerned about Trump. The big hearing coming up on Thursday could produce a real bombshell. If FBI Director James Comey testifies that Trump asked him to drop the investigation about Russian collusion. Oh, you mean he asked him to obstruct justice? Well, maybe. I don't know. Reports are now saying that Comey will debunk Trump's claim that Comey told Trump he wasn't under investigation. So the plot thickens, and it's not even 6 months into the administration's term. Trump has shown why putting a non-politician into a political office is about as smart as going to a urologist for brain surgery, which isn't bad, I guess, if that's where your brains are. But generally speaking, you go to the right doctor, you pick the right guy. Otherwise, it's a recipe for disaster. So let's see what bombs get dropped this week. Already, Comey has said that he took really, really serious notes. And just as we started recording, there was another thing that dropped that said that Comey told Sessions he didn't want to appear alone with Trump, as if, I guess Comey thought he needed witnesses. And that doesn't sound good for Trump. And, already, we haven't gotten to Thursday. Already we have all this Twitter stuff, and even a Republican Filipino, George Conway, who's married to Kellyanne Conway. Now, I know people who study Filipino history know that Filipinos have this thing for blondes, but usually it's of the Mae West variety. But Kellyanne Conway is sort of like the anti-Mae West. Anyway, George Conway openly disputing how Trump's tweets are hurting the travel ban's chances of getting a pass from the Supreme Court. So we know that some people are concerned. And, of course, we don't think the travel ban should get a pass from the Supreme Court. And Trump this week has said as much that, hey, look, a travel ban is a travel ban. He wasn't mincing words. So what? It's an unconstitutionally race-based and exclusionary policy. The Supreme Court's going to give a pass to that? I don't think so. Of course, the Twitter stuff started up with Trump's tweets taking the statements of London's Mayor Sadiq Khan out of context. You can see that, we talk about that in the blog post. He actually called Khan pathetic, when it was really Trump that misunderstood what Khan was trying to say. Khan wasn't downplaying terrorism. I mean, that's like the cardinal sin for Trump. If, terrorism is terrorism, it's the be-all, end-all. It's the reason why we have to do things in politics. It's our main motivator. But Khan really was just trying to keep the public calm. But this is the kind of stupidity that Trump brings to Twitter, and it's really embarrassing how limited Trump is to adapting quickly to being presidential, to being a leader. This, misconstruing, misunderstanding what another public official says about terrorism, about a situation that's live, the London attacks. Now, that's not being presidential. That's not being a leader. So what do we know after nearly 6 months? Trump's a bully, not very smart. The evidence is mounting. And we're not even talking about the Kathy Griffin thing, which is really sad. Because, if you really look at what Kathy Griffin was saying, she wasn't saying behead Trump. She was referring to Trump's comments where, in the pussy grabbing incident, Trump refers to blood coming out of the eyes, blood coming out of, all the orifices. She was parodying something that Trump was saying, which I think is still fair game with the First Amendment intact, right? Unless you want to go with an autocratic leadership. But the reaction of, by Trump and by the Trump family, which was the green light to all of Trump's supporters to go after Kathy Griffin. Here's what I think is really incredible. Kathy Griffin had a show in Northern California that was canceled. And if you saw her press conference, it's on YouTube, where she appeared with Lisa Bloom, explaining herself. I feel very, very sympathetic toward Kathy Griffin. She may have crossed the line in terms of taste, but that's not against the law. She did not threaten the President of the United States. And any call for a Secret Service investigation that's the political witch hunt that we should be fearing. That's the kind of thing an autocrat like Donald Trump does. When really Trump should be looking the other way and saying, well, what's Kathy Griffin? What's a little thing like Kathy Griffin? A threat to me, President of the United States? That's the way a true leader, a true president looks at these things. Instead, Kathy Griffin is the enemy. And I think it's just more stuff to keep us all preoccupied. But the First Amendment thing is a real thing. And consider this. If he goes after Kathy Griffin, who has no big network, no major shows, she got fired from CNN. If he can go after Kathy Griffin, he can go after little guys and girls and people who need the First Amendment. And I just think it's incredible that there's been such a backlash against Kathy Griffin. Jokes are still jokes. Taste is still taste. And, the ultimate censorship is not to shut down these people and tell these people to shut up. The ultimate censorship is that you, listener, audience member, can go somewhere else. I mean, that really is our choice, right? That's a free America. But we're in this polarized world now where, we're finding ourselves in these little moments. And we're getting to the point where the lines are being drawn, what can be said and what can't be said. And that's always bad for a democracy that leans heavily on the First Amendment, that relies on the First Amendment. You can't have that. All right, back on track with all the evidence mounting against Trump, about his misunderstanding. In an autocratic world, whatever he says goes, right? I mean, I guess the emperor has clothes, we think, right? But, the NATO speech where Trump leaves out the reassuring language for our allies, you don't think that's made some allies kind of, it's made Theresa May question, I guess England's got to go on its own now? And then, of course, the Paris Accord, which we all should have been talking about on Monday, except for that London, terror attack and Trump's tweeting about that. But Trump's pullout speech was based on misunderstanding. Like he wants a better deal for Americans. Well, guess what? It's a non-binding agreement. You submit another one to replace Obama's. Trump can do that, but instead he'd rather grandstand. Tell people he's pulling out like he's the big bad wolf in terms of climate change. But here's the thing about Trump. I mean, he's really not smart enough to be president. He's smart enough to put a brand on a building and sell a name. He's smart enough to put a brand on steaks and sell them on the Sharper Image. But governing takes more than slapping a label on democracy. Trump thinks being president is like being a hood ornament. That's Trump on the hood, laying out, leading the charge. He's hood ornament Trump. But where's the substance? It's not there. This is America. And with each passing day, he's assuring me that he's not making us great again. I mean, what he's done is polarize the country to such a degree. He's divided us on Twitter. He's coarsened the discourse. I mean, it's the reason we saw what happened in Portland with the white supremacist allegedly stabbing 3 people. 2 of them died. I mean, I talked about the Srinivas Kuchibhotla murder in February, the one that Trump didn't acknowledge until maybe 6 days had passed, and he mentioned it kind of briefly during that joint session before Congress. Kuchibhotla was the Kansas City engineer who was having a drink with a buddy when a white male, Adam Puritan, went up to him and said, "Get out of my country." Not good. Not good. But this is the environment, the political climate that Trump, it turns out he's more dangerous than any greenhouse gas. He's he's the guy who's got a hole in his ozone layer that creates all the bad stuff coming in and the polarization. Well, guess what? There's new research now that shows Asian Americans may have a problem. The new research is from the National Asian American Survey. It shows that whites, blacks, and Latinos see Asian Indians like Kuchibotla. That's enough to make you scream. But they see Asian Indians like Kuchibotla and don't see an Asian American. They see an Indian and they say he's not Asian American. But here's an alarming thing. The really alarming thing. Even East Asians, Chinese, Japanese, Koreans who look at Indians and Pakistanis here in America don't consider them Asian American. In other words, we have our own xenophobic problem, or to be specific, an Islamophobic problem. So go to the blog at aldef.org/blog and you can see the detailed numbers. But the research was conducted by Jennifer Lee and Karthick Ramakrishnan. I was able to speak to Jennifer. She was formerly, as of July, formerly out of UC-Irvine. She did most of her graduate work at Columbia University, and now she's returning in July as a sociology professor there. So I congratulated her, and we talked. I was hoping to get Karthick Ramakrishnan, who's at the University of California, Riverside. He's the dean of the School of Public Policy, but wasn't able to corral Karthick. We've talked to him before, but hopefully we'll get him. But here's my interview with Professor Jennifer Lee. She joined me to explain the findings of this. I think it's kind of alarming that East Asians look at South Asians, specifically Indians and Pakistanis, and don't see Asian Americans. Here's Professor Jennifer Lee.
This is a project that was born out of the 2016 National Asian American Survey, and Karthick Ramakrishnan is the director, and Janelle Wong, Taiku Lee, and I are co-directors on this study, and we really wanted to, with the 2016 National Asian American Survey, really wanted to get at some pressing questions, and one of which is, who counts as Asian Americans? Who, in the common understanding of Americans, and not just Asian Americans, who do people think are Asian American? And what prompted this was some of the trends that we were seeing. For instance, Asian Americans are the fastest growing group in the country, which you know and many people might know, but what's fueling a lot of that growth are immigrants from South Asia. So just to give you a sense, Bangladeshis, Pakistanis, and Indians have nearly doubled their share of the Asian American population from only 14% in 1990 to 26% today. But is that growth reflected in who we see as Asian American? And so you mentioned the murder of Mr. Kuchibotla. And one of the things we noticed is that there wasn't the type of collective outrage of his murder as there was, say, for Vincent Chin in 1983, or as the Asian Americans really rallied after the 1992 LA uprising. So we were trying to understand, do Asian Americans see South Asians as also Asian American? And so one of the questions we had on the survey was to ask a group of people who are Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Indian, Filipino, Pakistanis, and also whites and blacks and Latinos, whether you think these groups are Asian American. Are they likely to be Asian or Asian American, somewhat likely or not likely? And that sounds like a kind of an interesting way of asking, but we were really trying to get at whether people perceive different groups as Asian American and where they draw the boundary. And what we found in some ways was surprising and very unsurprising. So, as you might guess, Emil, most Americans, including whites, blacks, Latinos, and Asians, see the East Asian groups like Chinese, Japanese, and Koreans as Asian or Asian American. So, in their minds,
And it was a wide margin too. It was not
yeah.
like a how wide a margin exactly?
What's interesting is that only about 5% of whites don't think that Chinese, Japanese, or Koreans are Asian or Asian American. But when we asked about Indians and Pakistanis, about 41% believe that Indians are not likely to be Asian. And among Pakistanis, it's even higher at 45%.
This is asking whites.
Yeah, this is asking whites.
Yeah. And so this really just kind of bolsters the idea that Asian Americans are Chinese, which is kind of the standard stereotypical, or that's been the kind of the notion. When people say Asian American, they think Chinese. And I've even seen that kind of reaction among Filipinos who, when I moved toward writing for a larger Asian American audience, there's a kind of resentment because that's the perception.
Yes, I would say that actually there it's a little bit broader. So it's not just Chinese, it's also Chinese, Korean, and Japanese. So it's the three largest East Asian groups, well, not Vietnamese, but those three are clearly Asian American in the eyes of white Americans, Black Americans, Latino Americans, and also Asian Americans.
How wide was the margin with Asian Americans?
With Asian Americans, they were just as likely to see these groups as Asian or Asian American. What was shocking then is how they felt about South Asians like Indians and Pakistanis. So, as I said, among whites, about 41% don't believe that Indians are Asian or Asian American. Among Pakistanis, it's 45% of whites who don't perceive these groups, Pakistanis, as Asian or Asian American.
Well, we know that religion plays a strong part in the South Asian cultures as a kind of a dividing line. Hindus, Muslims, Islam. There's some Christianity in there, and other kinds of different forms of religion. How much do you think that contributes to this idea that, oh, well, Asian Americans are this, and maybe the South Asians are something else?
I would love to have a concrete answer for you. And I think that part of it might be the religious divide, but I think a lot of it is our phenotypical understanding of what an Asian American person might look like. And in the eyes of most Americans, including Asian Americans, it's Asian American equals East Asian. And
Right.
you asked about Filipinos, Emil, and I would say that they were interesting in the sense that they fell in between, that they were not, that white Americans, Black Americans, and Asian Americans saw Filipino Americans as in between. They're more likely to be Asian than Pakistanis and Indians, but less likely to be Asian than Koreans, Japanese, and Chinese. So the most excluded group are not the Filipinos, but are Indians and Pakistanis from the Asian American rubric, so to speak.
Yeah, so the Filipinos were the tweeners, and the
Yes.
Asians, the South Asians, like the Indians and the Pakistanis and the Bangladeshis, they were the left out. They weren't even tweeners.
Yes, they were absolutely marginalized in our understanding of who is Asian or Asian American, even though they themselves, and this is an important point, that they themselves defined themselves and saw themselves as Asian American. So there is an enormous gap between who we perceive, and by we, I mean all Americans perceive as Asian or Asian American, and how these groups, how South Asians view themselves and identify themselves. So there is definitely a disjuncture between in-group perceptions and out-group perceptions.
So we really have a kind of Wow, this exposes the fissures in Asian America that I have always thought was there. I mean, little cracks in our umbrella. I mean, and you sense it this year when you have people talking about, well, is it Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, or is it Asian American Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Heritage Month, or is it Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage? It's all the different forms. We just assume, well, my feeling is that Asian American is an inclusive term, or should be, right? Should be the
Yeah.
inclusive term. But now you're coming out with research that says, no, it's not inclusive, or, in the minds of the people who may use it the most, or may confront the idea of Asian American the most.
This is what's interesting is that Karthik and I, when we started we're focusing on this particular question, we were really interested in where people are drawing the boundaries among Asian Americans and where Asian Americans are drawing boundaries among themselves. And even though we as scholars and you as a journalist might take this approach that it's very inclusive, what we're finding is that there are sharp divides among who counts as Asian Americans and the common understanding of Americans, and that common understanding, there's this divide between East Asians, there's on the outside, on the marginalized side of who counts as Asian Americans are South Asians, Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis. And then, as you said, the Filipinos, I think this is a great term, are in between, the tweeners.
Yeah. Well, and when you said the Latinos were understanding of maybe, how some the South Asians could be Asian American more so than other non-Asians,
Mhm.
who knows? Maybe the Latinos you interviewed or were in the research were Filipinos with Spanish last names like myself. So
Actually, we try to. We were very careful about that
okay, all right.
in our survey. So I don't think that happened. But I do think, getting back to the point, that there's this cultural lag between the demographic realities of today's Asian American population and Americans' understanding of who Asian Americans are. So there's a real reality and a lag between our understanding.
All right. So why the reluctance? Because the reluctance seems to be on both sides. Meaning both sides, meaning Asian Americans are reluctant to embrace the South Asians, and the whites when they, consider Asian Americans, they see Asian Americans as one thing, the East Asians, and they see these South Asians, and this what makes me think that maybe the whole Islamophobia, thing and the
Mhm.
religious thing, comes into play because maybe they see South Asians in their own category because they're so different from the model minority. One would think, although the Indians and the South Asians are as model as as any of the model minorities, right? In terms of their tech savvy and whatnot.
Well, this is exactly the point you're hitting, Emil, which is excellent, which is that there is no clear cut answer in the sense that Indians, for instance, are the most highly educated Asian ethnic group. They're hyper selected. They are performing extremely well socioeconomically. And if you look at media accounts of Asian Indians, you have a number who are profiled as CEOs. Satya Nadella, for instance, from Microsoft, and so there are certainly media images of South Asians as Asian American, yet at the same time there is more of a reluctance or a lag in our understanding of who's Asian American. It might be that people have an idea of what a phenotypically Asian American person is like. It might be that they see East Asians and South Asians is not only phenotypically different, but also different in terms of religion. It certainly doesn't help that Trump has proposed a Muslim ban. And for many Americans, they are not able to distinguish who is Muslim and who is not. And so anyone who looks seemingly Muslim falls under that category. So
Yeah.
all of these things are at play.
Yeah, and it's understandable from the whites or the non-Asian perspective. Now, if we try to understand the Asian American perspective on this and how they even show a reluctance to embrace the South Asians, one wonders if there isn't a little bit of snobbery or competition or a kind of nationalistic sense, based on country of origin. Um, how do you see it, or how would you interpret the numbers, or try to understand the numbers and the differences that create this gap that you talk of?
Yeah, I think that there's this perceived cultural difference between East Asians and South Asians. Even though, and if you think about it, many of the Asian Americans are a majority immigrant population. So for them, even the idea of Asian is something that is placed upon them when they come to the United States. Someone who is from the Philippines, someone who's from Korea, or someone's from India, they don't come and think of themselves as Asian before they migrate. And so they come here and they're all of a sudden placed under a rubric of Asian American. I think there are, as you mentioned, religious differences. I think there are phenotypical differences. There are certainly cultural differences. There are differences that people see as so dividing that they're excluding some groups as Asian American. And so one of the things I also wanted to say is I think one of the things that's important to think about is also historically, if you look at Asian immigration, the groups that are most accepted as Asian have a longer history of immigration in the United States, including the Chinese, Japanese, and Koreans, for instance. And if you look at different countries, though, and this is why I think this is interesting, is that if you look at different countries like England, who counts as Asian American is very different there. So you have a different Asian immigrant stream. So there, South Asians are considered Asian. Yeah, a part of it is just who immigrates, which Asian ethnic groups immigrate from different countries, and what is the history. And so our history of Asian immigration, the South Asian immigrants are a newer immigrant group. So that is also one reason. I don't think that's the only reason.
Well, if you look at also the Filipinos being nationals, being colonized, maybe that
Yeah.
explains the tweener status, because they think the Filipinos are, well, there could be the confusion. Are they Latinos? Are they American? Or they've been part of America? Or I don't even think I don't want to be that generous to people who don't think they're Asian American, because I just think that there's a general ignorance and confusion about, well, they're Asian American. I know that Filipinos are very reluctant to embrace Asian America until they understand that as an umbrella, it's the only way that Filipino Americans can make an impact, because we come together, we're 21 million, which begins to make an impact. But when we all think of ourselves as separate, then it's we're micro communities.
Exactly. And I think this is why Karthik and I are particularly interested in this question is when you think about the Asian American community in the United States, we are much stronger and we are a much stronger mobilizing force if we're inclusive in who counts as Asian American. And so we really wanted this, our kind of gut actually led us to this question to try to get at, is there a divide? Are there boundaries being drawn, and what are those boundaries? So we were able to actually test that with the question, and our hunch actually proved to be correct, is that there is a boundary between Asian and non-Asian that separates the East Asians from the South Asians, with Filipinos falling in between. But it's important because what we are arguing is that when you have these boundaries, it really does affect how people conceive of the Asian American experience. If, for instance, people see me as a Korean American, as Asian American, but not Karthik, who's Indian American,
Right.
it really does change the way you only hear selective narratives about Asian Americans or the Asian American experience. And so one of the things we wrote very clearly in the article is that one of us is much more likely to experience discrimination than the other in the form of anti-Asian prejudice and violence. And of course, we're of different genders, but one of us is much more likely to be stopped for random security checks at airports or perceived as a terrorist or to be the victim of a hate crime. And again, we emphasize that we are of different genders, but the fact that Karthik is Asian Indian and could be perceived as Muslim, could be perceived as a terrorist, changes his Asian American experience. And those narratives tend to get lost under the Asian American umbrella if we decide that these groups are not Asian American.
Yeah, it really does showcase on a positive sense. It showcases our diversity within the diversity. On the negative sense, it exposes maybe our group's own sense of racism. And I say that as we all come from these essentially monolithic countries. And we come together to form a diversity in the United States, and maybe there is that sense of nationalistic or ethnic nationalism, between uh, East Asians and South Asians, and then you have the aspect of the color of skin.
Right.
Filipinos are dark, and uh, uh, Bangladeshis as South Asians come from areas where with the intense heat, and they're darker skinned, and we have stories of South Asians passing as African American in some places. I mean, this is, I think you've opened up, or you tell me if you think you've opened up a kind of a negative part of our Asian American community and how we perceive each other.
I think that's an excellent question, Emil, because I think the only way to move forward is to really unveil really a sense of who we are as Asian Americans. And we are not a monolith. We are composed of 24 different Asian ethnic or national origin groups of various socioeconomic statuses and phenotypes, skin colors, from different backgrounds, have different migration histories. So it is not a given that we as a group, as diverse as we are, will immediately embrace that diversity.
Right.
But one of the things I think that's important to show is that we are diverse, but at the same time, we are stronger if we mobilize together. And this is certainly a tactic that Latinos have used. If you think about the Latino community, there are a number of parallels, enormous diversity in that community, very different migration histories, phenotypes, socioeconomic statuses. But that group, um, Latino immigrants and Latino Americans understand that they have much more political power if they mobilize as Latinos as opposed to different ethnic groups. And so
Yeah.
this is what we're finding among Asian Americans, that if we want to have a political impact, if we want to have a voice at the table, we can't allow these internal divisions to actually divide us. That it's
Yeah.
much more effective to come together as you said, 21 million unified voices.
Yeah, well, the Latino example is interesting because within the Latino umbrella, you have the um, the African Latino, you have the North and South American, Latinos, and yet you would still have a lot of people who would see Latino as Mexican. And I guess
Yeah.
that's sort of like, Asian Americans in China, right? And
Mhm.
but with the Mexicans, and if you saw the movie El Norte, the great movie of the '80s, you know that there was a distinction that as people came up from Central and South America, there was a distinction made between the Guatemalans and the Salvadorans and the Nicaraguans and the Mexicans, and it all
Yeah.
happened. it all had to do with how they swore and how they, and, but I mean, those are kind of differences in the Latino community that maybe I don't know, maybe Asian Americans will have to go through and try to figure out what, how to come together. Now, you mentioned a phrase that has always been, in your piece in Society Pages, you mentioned a phrase that has always been near and dear to me as a member of the ethnic media or as a journalist, and that is the idea of a Pan-Asian approach. And when I was writing for Asian Week, there did seem to be a Pan-Asian approach to bring us all together. But are we moving toward a sort of a maturation level of a community so that these differences are inevitable? So we have differences between foreign-born and native-born, the immigrants versus those who were born here, second and third generations, who don't even see eye to eye with immigrants, or as well as these other nationalistic ethnic divisions that have come up. And does that tend to work against a real Pan-Asian approach, which for me, I mean, my perception is that no one is really pushing outwardly a Pan-Asian approach right now, but maybe it's time that as a community, we do push for it more.
Yes, I think it is difficult. It's not, I should say, not that it's difficult, but it is not a foregone conclusion that Asian Americans will all embrace a Pan-Asian identity for the reasons that you and I have discussed, in that Asian Americans, 2/3 are immigrants. And among those Asian American adults, that ratio goes up to 4 and 5. And so immigrants are much more likely to identify with their ethnicity or national origin than those who are born in the United States. And so part of this is an immigrant story, in the sense that if you have a large population that's immigrant, then you're more likely to identify along national origin lines as someone who's Chinese, Korean, Bangladeshi, Indian. But as the second generation is much more likely to embrace a pan-ethnic identity, or the longer Asian Americans, if you've been in the country longer, you start to see yourself as Asian American, in part because others identify you that way. What's interesting about our research is that others identify East Asians. So there are likely to lie differences between Chinese, Koreans, and Japanese, but they're drawing that boundary. And so I think it is up to us as Asian Americans, as journalists in the media, who are shaping the discourse, as scholars who are doing research, community activists. All of us have a role in really pushing forth a more Pan-Asian identity that is more effective politically.
The results are out. You're starting to get it out there for people like myself and others to see. Have you noticed that South Asian groups they've been experiencing this and living this before your research, and now they have the research to say, hey, this is really happening. It's just not our imagination. Are you seeing South Asian groups growing resentful of maybe a reluctance of an East Asian American embrace?
That's a really interesting question. When we started to post our results on Twitter, I think one of the things that was really heartening for both Karthick and me is we didn't feel resentment from South Asians about the findings. What we found is that most said that this explained their own experience, that they grew up in parts of California. They identified as Asian or Asian American, yet East Asians wouldn't see them as such, or their white friends wouldn't see them as such, or Black or Latino friends. And so our data actually confirmed their experiences, that despite the fact that they saw themselves as Asian American, that they were excluded by other Asians, by whites, by Blacks, by Latinos, as identifying from Asian. So for them, I think it just confirmed the kind of experience of not being perceived as an in-group member, even though they themselves saw themselves as Asian American.
Yeah, I can say that, like, as a member of the Asian American Journalists Association, I was surprised that, well, the South Asians have their own journalism
Mm,
association, and I believe they still continue. And I've had many South Asian friends from my elementary and junior high school days, and we knew that we were from the same, or our heritage was from the same region, from Asia. But I know that sometimes there was some differences, and and this also extends to other people who are parts of Central Asia and, say, the Middle East, who are technically Asian. I mean, do you count Arab Americans as Asian? Do you count people of Central Asia? I mean, certainly people of Kazakhstan are
right.
are Asian. And yet people would say, "Oh, well, we don't know what you are." I mean, we know that Borat was a fictional character from Kazakhstan, but
Right.
people wouldn't necessarily say, "Oh, Kazakhstan peoples are descendants of Asia," but they are.
Right. I mean, I think what you're saying it is something that we know as sociologists or social scientists more broadly is that all of these categories are socially constructed, meaning that they're not essential. There's no biological truth to these categories. They are constructed and they change over history and over time. But I think the most interesting thing about our findings is that there is a huge divide or disjuncture between how South Asians see themselves and how they're perceived by others. So it would be one thing if our results show that South Asians, like Pakistanis and Indians, didn't see themselves as Asian American, but they do. The interesting thing is that others don't see Indians and Pakistanis as Asian or Asian American. And so that's what's most fascinating. It's one thing, again, if everyone were on the same page, as everyone defined Asian or Asian American the same way, but there are these differences between how groups see themselves and how others see certain groups.
Yeah, and the whole thing is, in my mind, Asian America exists solely not just as a sociological construct, but it's really a political one, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it is there so that our communities can come together and be that 21 million and growing, and have that force. And isn't it funny that when President Obama was talking about uh, the future Asian American president, he didn't say Asian American president as, say, a Chinese American or a Japanese American. He mentioned a Hindu. Remember in one of his parting speeches, I don't know if you caught that, but Obama was saying, well, if we might have a Hindu American president. And
Mm,
and that struck me loud and clear, as he knew that the South Asian community, and we know that the South Asian community is very aggressive in terms of political empowerment and political awareness and fundraising. Obama was certainly aware of that. That was why he came to California as many times as he did.
yeah.
And the fact that he mentioned a Hindu president, to me, was the beginning of something, right? Of maybe something culturally. Yeah, I mean, and look, we have a California senator who replaced Barbara Boxer, Kamala Harris, who is part
Yeah.
Indian and part African American. So
Yes, and I think the other thing is what you're hitting on is that South Asians are driving the Asian immigrant growth and driving the growth of the Asian American
oh
population.
oh
So,
yes, definitely. I mean, look, I'm Filipino, and we always used to take pride in being number two to Chinese. I mean, and we're
oh,
Catholic; we should be number two, but we got edged out by the Indians. Now, I don't know.
you
Is that
did.
are those those special employee visas? we're Catholic.
But if you think about how large India is as a
Yeah.
country, it's not surprising that Filipinos would be edged out by Indians. But that kind of,
They caught us
yes, they
finally.
did catch you. And so Koreans are further down the chain. So, but what's interesting is, the question that we really were curious about is, given the changing demographic realities of Asian immigration, are is our understanding of who is Asian or Asian American changing along with the demographic realities? And really, at this point, it hasn't. I mean,
Yeah.
there is that the lag in the perception of who is Asian American and the numbers that show who is Asian or Asian American. And so there's always a cultural lag between the changes in the material realities and the cultural perceptions with anything, with gender beliefs, with a number of different kind of ideas of identity and power. And so here it's not terribly surprising to me that there is this difference. I think what surprised us most is how close, how there really weren't differences between whites, blacks, Latinos, and Asian Americans in our understanding of who is Asian American, and that Indians and Pakistanis did identify themselves as Asian American.
Right.
So
Right. Well, they're smart. I mean, they know where how to bring together coalitions, and maybe we'll see the community, the South Asian community, driving it, because as we see more of the leaders coming forth in say in these broader Asian American groups as presidents and as executive directors, maybe that perception will change. But let me just
yeah,
end our conversation with one question, because it seemed that, I mean, it's no mistake that, or maybe it's a coincidence, but you mentioned the Kuchubatla, you know, murder in the
yeah,
at the beginning of the piece, and of course there's that that connection with Vincent Chin, and Vincent Chin. When I asked the question, I asked if Kuchibutla would have the same kind of impact among South Asians as Vincent Chin. And, I even noticed that even among South Asian communities, it was a little slow to really mobilize or for have the community mobilized. I don't know where it is now. The case is moving on. And they did arrest them, the perpetrator. But now we come to June and another big anniversary date of the Vincent Chin
yeah.
murder. Maybe this is an opportunity, perhaps, or how do you? I mean, I know that you felt you came to a really strong conclusion at the end of your research about how South Asians were being ignored and how the entire group wasn't responding in the same way.
Yes, I mean, this is something that we thought was really important to underscore is that Asian Americans came together as a community after the murder of Vincent Chin in 1983. And so, given the effect we can have as a community, as a collective, as a mobilizing force, we weren't seeing the same kind of outrage after the murder of Mr. Kuchibatla or after Mr. Patel was beaten by two police officers. There have been a number of hate related incidents against South Asians, against Sikhs, against Muslims who are of Asian American descent. And this was something that really concerned both Karthick Ramakrishnan and me and my two other NAAS team members, Janelle Wong and Taiku Lee, the sense that we don't seem to see the same kind of collective outrage, the same kind of movement toward collective mobilization. And we think that we could be so much more effective if we do, one, see one another as not just fellow immigrants, but also Asian Americans. How much more effective can we be as a bloc if we express our outrage against murders of fellow Asian Americans and hate crimes against Asian Americans?
So maybe this month or June, and the another anniversary of the Vincent Chin murder will be an opportunity to show that unity.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I would love to see media coverage, for instance, where um, an outline of the kind of hate crimes against Asian Americans included those of South Asian descent, and that even when we talk about it, when we present as scholars, and when community activists, community organizations reach out about these issues, that we share these experiences and that we don't divide along ethnic lines or divide between East Asians and South Asians, because those are fictitious divisions.
Yeah, it would be surprising. Did the Japanese Americans that you asked, did they show the same reluctance to embrace the South Asians? Because I know that the Japanese Americans who see the Muslim ban as a kind of the second coming of the internment, I know that they're
Yes,
very outspoken.
they are very outspoken, but they were very similar in the sense that
Mm,
they're not likely to see them, South Asians, as Asian Americans. They may be against the Muslim ban
yeah.
because for them, there's a certain repeat of history that you do not want to repeat, that there are so many parallels with the internment, but it doesn't change the perception of who is Asian American for Japanese Americans.
So maybe we shall see the impact in future research of Islamophobia as as a dividing force. Creating these fissures in Asian America.
No, that's an excellent angle for a paper. And I should say that Karthick Ramakrishnan and I are taking these data, and we want to write a much more involved paper in what kind of factors drive these kinds of divisions. Is it really along immigrant versus US born lines? Are there geographic disparities? Are there differences based on education levels? And so as we proceed with this project, we look forward to shedding light more on the kind of factors that lead to these internal divisions.
Oh, that would be great. And I always appreciate your research, Professor Lee. Just don't forget me in the mini footnotes that you might have.
No, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Emil. You always ask really probing questions and get me to think about what is fascinating about the research. So I've always enjoyed this partnership that we have.
Well, you are doing the important work, and congratulations to you again on being a sociology professor at now Columbia University, your alma mater, and good luck to you there.
Thank you so much.
That's Jennifer Lee, sociology professor at Columbia University, sharing the research done with Professor Karthick Ramakrishnan of the University of California, Riverside, on the East Asian-South Asian divide in the Asian American community, as documented by research in the National Asian American Survey. Check out my blog at aldef.org/blog for more details on the numbers. Now, I had to talk to an Indian American. I wanted Karthick, wasn't able to get him on this week, and I will in the future. But I recently was at a conference where I met Pawan Dhingra, who is a sociology professor and chair at Tufts University. He's done some fascinating work on Patel motel owners, and I honestly can say some of my best friends are Patel motel owners I grew up with in San Francisco. And that's where the rise of this incredible socioeconomic phenomenon that Professor Dhingra has documented, and he's told their story. It's taking place here in the Bay Area. The Patel motel owners have become a force in the American economy and in politics. But I wanted to get his reaction to this Indian, Pakistani, South Asian conundrum about who is Asian American and we were at this conference. We're outside the conference, outdoors. Here's my conversation with sociology professor Pawan Dhingra of Tufts University. Alarmed is maybe too alarmist word.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's to some degree. I find it. I don't really have, to some degree, not fully. To some degree, I don't have an emotional reaction to it, because to me, it's like, well, if other Asian Americans don't consider South Asians to be Asian American, but one of my reactions to that is, well, that's just information. That's just good for me to know. Like I just learn from that. I'm agnostic about it. It's good to know. But to the extent that I have an emotional reaction to it, it's, here's the point. If I felt that I was not included in Asian American circles, even though I identify as Asian American, that would be hurtful. And so the question is, and I have felt that way many times.
Well, that is the implication is that there's some kind of exclusion based on this perception.
But to the extent that people like myself who are South Asian and active in Asian American circles, there has become a good degree of acceptance and connectivity. And so, for instance, I can be invited to speak at this kind of platform today, which 10 years ago may not have happened, right? I'm active in academic circles, Asian American academic circles, and South Asians have a strong presence they didn't have 15 years ago. So I see things changing in meaningful ways that I'm not alarmed by it. I mean, I think that, I'll put it that way.
So it's not indicative of something bubbling under, something.
Again, this has been going on since the 90s.
Yeah.
Or even earlier. So I'm sure that there are many Asian Americans who are Islamophobic. They're Indo-Indians who are Islamophobic. So
people brought it up. All right, if you read the article in Society Pages that Jennifer Lee and Karthick Ramakrishnan published recently, they specifically mentioned the Kuchi Botla murder in Kansas City, in Olathe, Kansas, and that hate crime. And the reaction was muted amongst almost everyone, even the South Asians for a while. They came on strong because it happened on a weekend. But there was a feeling that the general Asian American population did not bring it up to a level of Vincent Chin, did not react.
That's a very fair point. I think that there is something about this that gets read as that is a kind of war on terror, implication.
Right.
And that's a Arab issue. And so as an Asian American, as an East Asian American, that has no connection, no visceral connection to me. It may have an intellectual connection, but it doesn't have a visceral connection to me, because there's no way in which we would be considered to be terrorists or Arabs. In fact, so that was actually many of the Indians' reaction. Why are you targeting us? We're not terrorists. We're not, we're not Arab. So I do agree that if Indians were seen as more central to Asian America, then that murder and other hate crimes would be seen as more of an Asian American issue. And that's regretful that it's not. I see that. That's fair.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up to another anniversary, Vincent Chin's murder, June. Always a point of, for generations it was sort of the galvanizing thing that turned people into activists. It's a thing that people still go over in their minds historically to say, how could this happen? Maybe is this an opportunity for South Asians and East Asians and the entire Asian American community to come together? Is it make it a special time given the overall environment that exists?
That's interesting. So, thinking about Vincent Chin, right? A Chinese American mistaken for a Japanese American, who was mistaken for Japanese economy. So anyway, and so it made sense that brought some parts of the Asian American community together. Right, so Chinese Americans were galvanized, Japanese Americans were galvanized. They saw their faces connected, and that sparked an inter-ethnic movement that we now we look back on and say that was an Asian American movement. If you translate that to today, then what you would expect to see, but won't see, but what you would expect to see is not necessarily an Asian American movement around the murders in Kansas. Mm-hmm. You would expect then South Asian Indians to connect with Arab Americans, right? That would be the connection you would see if it's Vincent Chin 2.0, and you would find connectivity there. Like we were the ones attacked. We were mistaken for people like you. Let's come together. Let's organize. Let's push against this kind of hate. But you don't see that happening very much.
So we're not going to see.
So that
missed opportunity.
That would
maybe.
Right.
Maybe
that would be the
could happen.
Right, that would happen. But that would be where there are South Asian American and Arab American, circles happening and meaningful movements happening. But they're very, very like grassroots. Yeah. They're not moving up.
Not national.
Not national.
So,
for the most part.
Missed opportunity?
Missed opportunity, oh yeah, and it's been a missed opportunity for years. Yeah. Where there needs to be more, but that's the thing, right? It's not like, I don't expect that kind of incident to galvanize Koreans. Yeah. It'd be nice if it did. But if you think about it in terms of Vincent Chin, it really should galvanize Arabs and South Asians to come together. Because that's really the connection, right? And that's what we should have. We should have a broader definition of Asia that incorporates Arab America.
Well, if you want to include Central Asia, you do include the Middle East. You do include
exactly. I mean, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq. I mean, they're all one big line.
Right.
And so where does one end? Come on.
So what's a better? I mean, you talk about this. You study it. You're a professor. Where should we be heading 21st century Asian America? The umbrella's got to be bigger, right? The umbrella's got to expand.
The umbrella's got to expand, but at the same time, the more you expand it, the less meaningful it is to certain people, right? Yeah. So now if we're talking about Afghani Americans or Iraqi Americans as being central to as being part of Asian America, then does a third generation Japanese American have what?
Yeah, but Afghani American. If you're in Fremont in the Silicon Valley and you're living next to all these these companies that where a third of the workers are Asian American specifically, well, it really runs the gamut. South Asian, East Asian,
right?
But there's the large Afghani community in Fremont. Mm-hmm. They got to feel a part of that. They got to feel a part of that Asian American. Maybe
they do.
We know what happens. Everyone goes into their ethnic niche, right?
Yeah, and it depends on other things too. The Asian American movement made sense because it brought people together who felt it was local, Detroit. It also brought people together from who had a mindset to be already kind of to be favored towards thinking in those terms, right? But if people have different class backgrounds,
right? Well, I mean, we're not homogenous, right? We're just all.
You're trying to find what will it take for all of us to come together. That's what you're asking.
Unity.
That's what you're asking. What's the term? What's the incident? What's the next thing that will make us all come together, right?
And not that Vincent Chin did, but it did enough. It did enough.
It did enough
to
that's
bring
true.
us together.
And I think it's a fair question. I think it's a really good question to ask, what you're asking in many ways is, why is it that the current level of hate crimes against Indians is not having the same effect, right? And it's not even mobilizing like Indians as a whole. You are seeing things like I went to a vigil in Boston after the murder, and it was just a small vigil, but it was local and it was meaningful. People came out. It happened all over the country. There was murders in Oak Creek a few years ago, but it hasn't. So many Indians and other South Asian Americans, I think today, feel like relatively comfortable, and these things are read as exceptions, and it's not gotten to the point now where there is and the reasons I can't fully explain, it has not gotten to the point now where there's a sense of we have to come together and, activate around this.
Because we're too American and less Asian.
That's your words, not mine.
I know, but I mean, I'm just trying.
But think about Vincent Chin. I mean, it was Americanized. It was Americans, U.S. born and raised, of Asian descent who got active.
Right.
I mean, I think, again, what we're seeing here, I think, is
we're too comfortable.
You see people getting. One thing we're seeing a lot of today, and I don't know if it's new or newer or it has a lot of precedent, but you see, people coming together based around their occupations. So South Asian cab drivers are incredibly active, right? Farm workers, incredibly active.
The Chinese Takeout Association was formed in Philadelphia in response to the takeout.
Incredibly active.
Yeah.
And those things spread.
Right.
And now that to me is a form of activism.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And so the South Asian American community is very active in many ways.
Yeah.
There's a long history of it, that. And they're getting involved politically, right? That's a form of activism, civic activism at least. And so there's ways in which it's happening. Is it happening in this way that we can brand in the way we saw 30 years ago? Maybe not.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't read that. To me, that doesn't mean there's activism happening. A lot of activism is happening. A lot of it is.
Right.
It's not taking the same shape necessarily that we're used to.
Different time, generation later.
Right.
Vincent Chin, and then different from Martin Luther King, different from... Well, what did we have before Martin Luther King? We just had racism.
Yeah, we had other people.
All right, Professor, thank you very much for your time. Professor Pawan Dhingra, Tufts University, and his reaction, kind of interesting. He's trying to be agnostic, trying to, be informed by this. But, he does get into some interesting things. And maybe as a journalist, maybe as a commentator, my thing is what's going to make us united? Maybe he's right. I'm looking at what's going to get us united. And maybe I should just see it as, here's this fissure. I still want to see how we can make it better, how we can come together. Maybe a better umbrella? I don't know. But the issue is real. East Asians look at South Asians and don't see Asian Americans. And now to some odds and ends. I want to give a hello and get well to David O., who's a Philadelphia councilman. Oh, that's enough to shriek. The reason I do that is because on my mixer, the button for the shriek is right by my middle finger, which I don't have much control over. That middle finger. Anyway, David O., Philadelphia councilman, was stabbed last week. Strange story. A guy came up to him, put a shiv up his side. O has done an interview. He's doing well. I tried to reach out for him, wasn't able to contact him. But O, as you know, is trying to find justice for Chinese takeout owners in Philly. We did a show on that. Catch it in the back issues of Emil Amok's Takeout. Because we got to protect the takeout owners. So I wish David O. well, and we may even see him in Philly when AAJA, the Asian American journalists, meet there in July. Finally, I like basketball, I like sports, I like the Warriors, and I hope by the time this drops, well, I know it's going to be before Game 3, but I think the Warriors are going to go up 3-0. Is there any doubt they're going to go up 3-0 against LeBron and the Cavs in Cleveland? Because I think they deserve the tag. They are the GOAT team. The GOAT. Greatest of all time. And I'm partial to GOATs as my Lunar New Year symbol, the GOAT. You could say the Ram, but I like the GOAT. Greatest of all time. The Warriors, and even more impressive than the most win season last year. They didn't win the championship, but this year, I think they're going to do it. They're going to sweep the final. They didn't waste it on the regular season. They're going to sweep the postseason. Now that's better than Jordan's Bulls. That's better than Magic's Lakers. They're just better. I don't think we've seen a better team, ever. And now Durant's in the mix, and let me just say this. The real difference maker, right? He's no Harrison Barnes. I remember last year watching, and I love Harry Barnes, Mr. Iowa basketball. I love Harrison Barnes. And every time he made a shot and clanked and missed, oh my goodness. But Durant is not Harrison Barnes. He's a difference maker. I remember seeing Durant play for Oklahoma City, very early on, thinking, he's the guy. He is the best player. I think they misused him in Oklahoma City. Now he's found his rhythm. He's found his team. And I just think there's no way the Warriors can lose. And this year's Harrison Barnes, Tristan Thompson of the Cavs. Tristan Thompson he's been voided because the Cavs can't play with two big guys. They got to sit down one. And when Thompson does play, Tristan Thompson, totally negated by the Warriors. Durant, Curry, Draymond Green, Klay Thompson when he's on, those four, the right blend for greatness. Warriors 3-0. I predicted Warriors in 5 because I was giving LeBron one game at home. But if the Warriors win all games, or at least one game on the road, well, they're going to win all games, but when they win a game on the road, it's free tacos for the nation. So you got to root for the Warriors. Okay. The Warriors, Trump, Comey, that's our program. Hey, we're on iTunes. Please subscribe, rate, and review. You can also let out a shriek. But I don't think iTunes counts that. Tell your friends about this show. Share a link. You can contact me on Twitter at Emil Amok, or you can go to the AALDEF blog at www.aldef.org/blog. Give us your feedback on www.amok.com. My Twitter feed's there. I haven't really been contributing to the blog as much because I've been doing the AALDEF blog, but there's stuff there. There's stuff there for you at www.amok.com, and you can leave a message on SpeakPipe. You don't need a phone, and if you're so moved, check out the blog and support the program. Go to the aldef.org/blog. And on the right side, there's a little red rectangle. Click on the donate button. And I say this because AALDEF is a 501c3. Your help is fully tax deductible. Just let them know you like the podcast and blog. And like I said, you want a tax break? Well, fully tax deductible. Not like Patreon. I mean, really, 501c3. Go to the donate button at aldef.org/blog if you're so moved. And that's it. Once again, thanks for listening to Emil Amok's Takeout. Our show coming up later in June in San Diego, so we may be seeing some slightly truncated versions of Emil Amok's Takeout, but we'll be there for you. We may even do something live from San Diego. We're going to see. But we'll be there. So thanks for listening. It's Emil Amok's Takeout. I'm Emil Guillermo.